When the auctioneer unlocked my grandfather's safe, everyone in the room went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet that comes when strangers are waiting for paperwork to be signed. This was the kind of quiet that feels like the air has been pulled out of the walls. My mother stood beside me in her cream wool coat, her hands folded over her purse, wearing the same calm smile she had worn my entire life whenever she was about to hurt me. For 42 years, she had told me I would never own a home, not because I was careless, not because I was lazy, but because, according to her, women like me were meant to rent, compromise, and be grateful for whatever corner of the world they were allowed to occupy. Then the auctioneer lifted a yellowed envelope from the back of the safe, turned it over, and read my name, my full name, Nora Ellen Whitaker. Inside that envelope was a deed to a house I had never been told existed, a bank ledger showing an account worth more than I had earned in 20 years of teaching, and a handwritten letter from my grandfather dated 2 months before he died. The first line said, "If you are reading this, Nora, then someone kept the truth from you." I remember looking at my mother then. For the first time in my life, she did not look disappointed in me. She looked afraid. Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I am not a dramatic woman. That matters to understand. I have spent most of my adult life in classrooms, and classrooms teach you patience in a way few places can. You learn that truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it appears in the quiet child who finally raises her hand. Sometimes it hides in the student who never turns in homework but can explain every lesson if you just sit beside him and ask, gently. I taught American history at a public high school in Dayton, Ohio. 32 desks, 2 broken blinds, a coffee maker that sounded like it was losing an argument every morning, and a wall covered with timelines, maps, protest posters, court cases, and student essays. I loved my work. It did not make me rich, but it made me useful. And for a long time, useful was enough. I lived in a small rented duplex on Ashbury Street with slanted floors, a back porch that creaked in the rain, and a kitchen window facing an alley where stray cats gathered like a neighborhood council. I paid my bills on time. I drove a 12-year-old Toyota. I graded papers at my kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea and a red pen in my hand. My life was modest, but it was mine, or at least I thought it was. My mother, Elaine Whitaker, had always treated my life like a disappointing first draft. She was beautiful in a controlled way, the kind of woman who never left the house without lipstick, even to check the mail. She worked for years as an executive assistant at a private investment office downtown, where she learned the language of important men and polished rooms. She could speak gently while tightening a noose. She never shouted. That would have made her easier to dislike. Instead, she corrected. You should have married better. You should have gone into administration. You are too sentimental with money. Renting is probably best for someone like you. Someone like you. That phrase has a way of becoming furniture in your mind. You stop noticing it until one day you try to move freely and realize it has been blocking the door for years. My father died when I was 19. Heart attack. Sudden, cruel, final. After that, my mother became the only parent in the house, and the house itself became less like a home and more like a court where I was always on trial. My grandfather, Henry Whitaker, was different. He had been a carpenter, then a small contractor, then the quiet owner of 3 old properties on the west side of the city. He smelled like sawdust, black coffee, and wintergreen mints. His hands were large and careful. He never said much, but when he listened, you felt as if he was holding your words in both palms. When I was a girl, he taught me how to measure twice before cutting once. He said that rule applied to lumber, money, promises, and people. I did not understand that last part until much later. Grandpa Henry died when I was 24, just after I had started teaching full-time. My mother handled everything. The funeral, the estate, the attorney, the bank. She told me there was nothing left except debts, tools, and a few sentimental things. I believed her. That is one of the painful lessons in life. We do not always believe people because they are honest. Sometimes we believe them because doubting them would require us to rebuild our entire history. For nearly 18 years after his death, I carried a small wooden box he had made for me. Inside were three things: a photograph of him standing beside a half-built staircase, an old brass key that I assumed opened nothing anymore, and a note he had written when I graduated college. Build a life no one can evict you from. I thought it was encouragement. I did not know it was a warning. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday in October. I was grading sophomore essays on Reconstruction when my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it. Teachers become experts at ignoring interruptions, but something made me answer. A man asked for Miss Nora Whitaker, granddaughter of Henry Joseph Whitaker. His voice was formal, older, and slightly strained. I said, "This is Nora." He paused. Then he said, "I am calling from Merit and Low Auction Services regarding the scheduled estate property review at 418 Bellweather Lane." I told him he had the wrong person. He apologized, then asked if I was aware that my name appeared on a notification list connected to a secured item being opened before auction. I remember the exact way my pen stopped moving over the essay in front of me. A secured item. Before auction. I asked who authorized the auction. He said the request came through the estate representative, Mrs. Elaine Whitaker, with supporting documentation from a law office. My mother. I thanked him, wrote down the address and sat very still after the call ended. 418 Bellweather Lane. I knew that street. Everyone in Dayton knows streets like Bellweather Lane. Old sycamores, deep porches, houses built when people still believed hallways deserved windows. It was not a mansion street, but it was beautiful in that worn, dignified way old neighborhoods can be beautiful when they have survived both neglect and greed. I called my mother that evening. She answered on the third ring. "Hello, Nora." No surprise, no warmth. Just the sound of a woman who had already decided how the conversation should go. I asked her about Bellweather Lane. For half a second, there was nothing. Then she laughed softly. "Oh, that old mess. It was your grandfather's." Briefly. "It's being sold to cover outstanding maintenance liens. Nothing for you to worry about." Why was I contacted? Probably some clerical error. You know how these small companies are. In class, when a student lies, they often give you too much detail or too little. My mother gave me exactly the middle amount. She had always been good at that. I asked why she had never mentioned the house. "Nora, your grandfather had many little arrangements. Most of them were sentimental and worthless. Don't start building fantasies." There it was. The familiar pat on the head without a hand being raised. I nearly apologized. That was my old instinct, to shrink the question until she did not have to answer it. But that day, something in me stayed seated. I said, "I'd like to see the paperwork." Her voice cooled. "You have no legal interest in it." "How do you know?" "Because I handled the estate." That sentence should have ended the conversation. Instead, it began everything. Over the next 2 weeks, small things started appearing where I had never noticed them before. A letter from a bank I did not use, addressed to me but delivered to my mother's house by mistake. She called to tell me she had thrown it away because it was junk. A voicemail from an attorney's assistant asking whether I planned to attend the inventory review. A strange message from my older cousin Paul saying, "Don't let Mom and Aunt Elaine pull you into old property drama. Not worth it." When I asked what he meant, he did not respond. Then one Saturday morning, while helping my mother clear out her basement after a water leak, I found a cardboard file box labeled HJW Closeout. It was tucked behind Christmas decorations and a broken lamp. My mother was upstairs speaking to the plumber. I should tell you something plainly. I did not go there intending to snoop. But teachers know the difference between curiosity and evidence. Curiosity wanders. Evidence calls your name. Inside the box were old utility bills, repair invoices, county tax forms, and photocopies of checks. Most meant nothing to me, but one folder had my name written on the tab. Nora. My hands went cold before I opened it. Inside were copies of savings bonds issued to me when I was a child, a letter from my grandfather's former attorney, and a document titled Beneficiary Confirmation. The date was 15 years old. My name appeared beside something called the Bellweather Preservation Trust. Before I could read further, my mother's voice came from the basement stairs. "What are you doing?" I turned. She stood there with one hand on the railing, her face perfectly composed. I held up the folder. "What is this?" She came down slowly. "That is old paperwork. It has my name on it." "Nora, put it back." "Not please, not let me explain. Put it back." Something in her tone reminded me of my classroom during a lockdown drill. Calm voice, controlled movement, danger not named but present. I put the folder back, but not before noticing the attorney's name at the top of one letter, Margaret S. Levin. That night, I wrote it down. I also wrote down the address, the trust name, and every date I could remember. Then I did what I always told my students to do when history looked too clean. I went to the records. County property records are not glamorous. They are fluorescent lights, board clerks, old computer terminals, and the smell of dust warmed by machines. But they contain a kind of truth that family stories often do not. The following Monday, after school, I drove to the Montgomery County Recorder's office with a legal pad in my tote bag and a granola bar for dinner. I searched Henry Joseph Whitaker. His name appeared on 4 properties. 3 had been sold years ago. The 4th was 418 Bellweather Lane. The owner listed was not my mother. It was not an estate. It was not a bank. It was Bellweather Preservation Trust. Beneficiary Nora E. Whitaker. I sat there for a long time. On the screen, my name looked both familiar and impossible. The clerk, a tired woman with silver glasses, leaned over and said, "You all right, honey?" I said, "I think I just found a house." She smiled. Then she read the screen more carefully, and the smile faded. "There's a pending auction notice attached." I asked how a house owned by a trust with my name on it could be auctioned without me. She looked around, lowered her voice, and said, "You need a lawyer. Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes you precise." I drove home without turning on the radio. The city moved past me in pieces. Gas station lights, wet pavement, a man walking a dog under a red umbrella, the windows of houses where people were eating dinner and arguing about ordinary things. I wanted one ordinary problem. A broken dishwasher, a parent complaint, a stack of late essays. Instead, I had a house I did not know I owned, a trust no one had told me about, and a mother who had lied with the ease of someone reading a grocery list. At home, I sat at my kitchen table and took out a yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote one sentence: "What do I know for certain?" That was how I taught historical investigation. Separate fact from interpretation. Separate documents from rumors. Separate what happened from what people wanted you to believe happened. I listed facts. My grandfather owned Bellweather Lane. My name was connected to the trust. My mother had handled his estate. My mother was trying to auction something related to the property. Someone had placed my name on a notification list. My mother told me I had no legal interest. One of those facts did not belong with the others. I did not sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather's handwriting. "Build a life no one can evict you from." The next morning, I called in sick for only the second time in 7 years. Then I searched for Margaret Levin. She had retired from estate law, but her former firm still existed under a new name, Levin, Price and Dougherty. Their office was downtown, in a brick building with brass mail slots and a receptionist who looked at me with professional kindness. I did not expect anyone to see me. But when I gave my name, the receptionist's expression changed. "One moment, Miss Whitaker." 10 minutes later, a woman in her late 50s stepped into the lobby. "I'm Claire Dougherty," she said. "I worked under Margaret Levin before she retired. Would you come with me?" Her office had shelves of probate binders and a small framed print of the Ohio Supreme Court building. She closed the door and asked me what I knew. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, taking notes with a fountain pen. When I finished, she removed her glasses. "Miss Whitaker, I need to be careful. I cannot make accusations without reviewing the file, but I can tell you this. Your grandfather was a meticulous man. If he created a trust for your benefit, it would not disappear casually." My throat tightened. My mother said there were only debts. Claire's expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving. Did she provide you with an accounting? No. Did you sign any waiver? No. Did you receive notice of trust administration? No. She leaned back. Then we start there. It was the first time since the auctioneer's call that I did not feel entirely alone. Claire gave me instructions, and I followed them like homework. Do not confront your mother. Do not sign anything. Do not speak to the auction company except in writing. Preserve every voicemail, text, email, envelope, and document. Write a timeline. Photograph the basement file box if I could safely access it again. Check my credit report. Search for bank accounts opened under my name. That last instruction confused me. She noticed. Financial abuse often travels with paperwork abuse, she said gently, especially in families. I went home and began. There is something almost holy about documentation when your life has been shaped by people denying your reality. I made folders. I printed emails. I saved voicemails. I requested certified property records. I placed the old brass key from my grandfather's wooden box beside my laptop and stared at it as if it might speak. 3 days later, Claire called. Her voice was controlled, but different. We found part of the old file. Part of it? Some records were transferred to archive. Some are missing. That word landed heavily. She continued. Your grandfather created the Bellweather Preservation Trust 18 months before his death. You were named primary beneficiary. Your mother was never trustee. I gripped the phone. Then who was? A local attorney named Richard Voss. I knew that name. Everyone who dealt with property downtown knew Richard Voss. He had served on charitable boards, appeared in newspaper photos at ribbon cuttings, and spoke in careful, reasonable sentences. Claire said, Do you know him? No. But my mother does. How? She worked for an investment office connected to Voss Development. Another silence. This one had weight. Then Claire said, Nora, I'm going to request a full trust accounting immediately. That afternoon, my mother called me 5 times. I did not answer. At 7:14 p.m., she left a voicemail. Her voice was soft. Nora, I hear you've been asking questions. I know this feels important to you, but you're stepping into matters you don't understand. Your grandfather made many promises he could not keep. Please don't embarrass yourself. Call me. I saved it. At 7:32, Richard Voss called. I had never given him my number. Miss Whitaker, he said warmly. Richard Voss. I believe there's been some confusion regarding an obsolete trust matter. Obsolete. A word men like him use when they want theft to sound administrative. I said, Please contact my attorney. He chuckled lightly. Of course. Though I would hate for you to spend money unnecessarily. Your mother is very concerned about you. There it was. Concern as a weapon. I said again. Please contact my attorney. His voice remained pleasant. Certainly, but before this becomes formal, you should know that old properties carry liabilities, taxes, code violations, environmental issues. Sometimes an inheritance is not a gift. Sometimes it is a burden. I understand. I'm not sure you do. For the first time, the warmth thinned. Then he said, People have worked very hard to keep that house from becoming a problem. I wrote that sentence down the moment he hung up. People have worked very hard. Not your grandfather. Not the trust. People. The truth has a weight of its own. But lies have architecture. They need beams, braces, locked rooms, and quiet workers maintaining them year after year. Over the next month, Claire and I began pulling at those beams. The Bellweather house had not been neglected by accident. It had been kept in a strange legal twilight. Taxes paid late but not unpaid, repairs authorized but never completed, insurance maintained under a trust account, utility service minimal. The property looked abandoned, but on paper it was alive just enough to be controlled. A forensic accountant named Daniel Reyes joined our case. He was a quiet man who wore brown shoes with gray suits and explained financial records as if he were teaching weather patterns. Money leaves tracks, he told me during our first meeting. Even when people try to sweep, he found tracks, small withdrawals from the trust account labeled maintenance, consulting fees paid to companies connected to Voss, legal review charges, storage fees, property management fees. Over 18 years, nearly $312,000 had been drained, not all at once, That would have been too obvious. It was taken the way water damages a ceiling, drop by drop, until one day, the whole thing caves in. Then, Daniel found something worse. A notarized document from 11 years earlier claimed I had declined beneficial interest in the trust. My signature appeared at the bottom. I stared at the scan until the letters blurred. It was not my signature. Not even close. My real signature is teacherly, fast, slightly tilted, formed from years of signing hall passes and recommendation letters. The signature on the document was careful and decorative, like someone had copied my name from a formal invitation. Claire looked at me. Did you sign this? No. Were you in Ohio on this date? I checked my old school calendar. No, I said slowly. I was in Chicago with the debate team. State finals. Claire's eyes sharpened. Can you prove it? I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because for the first time the small machinery of my ordinary life became armor. I'm a teacher, I said. We keep everything. I found the travel reimbursement form in an old email archive, hotel confirmation, bus invoice, photos of my students holding plaques, a time-stamped email to the principal sent from Chicago the same afternoon I supposedly sat in Dayton signing away my rights. That was when I understood. This had not been confusion. This had been a plan. And someone had believed I was too ordinary, too tired, too obedient, or too ashamed to question it. They had mistaken quiet for weakness. A week later, I received a letter by courier. It came in a thick cream envelope from Voss and Bellamy, attorneys at law. Inside was a proposed settlement agreement. They offered me $25,000 in exchange for signing a release of all claims related to the Bellweather Trust and property. The language was dense, polished, and predatory. It required confidentiality. It required acknowledgement that all prior documents were valid. It required me to agree that any dispute arose from misunderstanding rather than misconduct. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Richard Voss. Nora, this is a generous chance to close a painful family matter with dignity. Dignity. I sat at my kitchen table with that letter beside a stack of ungraded essays on the Bill of Rights. The irony was not lost on me. My students were writing about due process while I was being asked to surrender mine. I sent the letter to Claire. She called 15 minutes later. Do not respond. I wasn't going to. Good. This means they're worried. I looked out the kitchen window at the alley cats moving along the fence. How worried? Enough to put money on paper. That night, my mother came to my duplex. She did not call first. I saw her through the front window, standing under the porch light, immaculate in a navy coat, holding a bakery box. When I opened the door, she smiled. I brought lemon cake, as if we were the kind of family that healed things with dessert. I let her in, because part of me still wanted an explanation from her mouth, not an apology. I had stopped expecting that. But I wanted to see whether there was any corner of the truth she could touch without flinching. She placed the cake on my kitchen counter and looked around my small home. You keep this place nicely. It sounded like praise, but I knew the hidden sentence beneath it. For what it is. We sat at the table. She removed her gloves, finger by finger. Richard told me you hired an attorney. Yes. Her eyes hardened just slightly. You have no idea what you're doing. That may be true. That's why I hired someone who does. She smiled sadly. This is exactly what your grandfather feared. You becoming consumed by something beyond you. I folded my hands. What did Grandpa fear? That you would confuse sentiment with entitlement. There it was again. The lesson she had been teaching my whole life. Wanting fairness was greed. Asking questions was entitlement. Remembering love was sentiment. I said, did you know I was named beneficiary of the trust? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, your grandfather changed his mind many times. That wasn't my question. I protected you. From a house? From disappointment. I almost believed she believed it. That was the worst part. Manipulative people do not always wake up thinking they are villains. Some wake up believing they are the only adults in a world of children. I asked her about the forged waiver. Her face changed. Not much, but enough. A tiny tightening near her mouth. A blink held too long. I don't know what you're referring to. I stood up, walked to my desk, and picked up a folder. I was in Chicago that day, with 31 students, 2 chaperones, and a principal who still writes Christmas cards. Her voice lowered. Nora, just my name, a warning wrapped in motherhood. I said, you should leave. She rose slowly. You will destroy this family over an old man's fantasy. No, I said. Someone already damaged this family. I'm only reading the record. At the door, she turned back. You were never meant to live in that house. I looked at her. Why? For the first time, she had no polished answer. After she left, I did not cry immediately. I cut a slice of lemon cake, carried it to the trash, and dropped it in. Then I sat on the kitchen floor and cried so hard, the old radiator clicked beside me like a metronome keeping time with grief. The next morning, Claire filed an emergency motion in probate court to halt the auction. The auction stopped 2 days before the scheduled sale. That angered Richard Voss. Polite men can be frightening when politeness no longer works. His attorneys sent letters accusing me of harassment, defamation, interference with contractual expectations, and emotional instability. Emotional instability. I had seen that trick before. Women who document harm are called unstable by people who depend on silence. Claire was not impressed. She's a high school teacher with 18 years of employment records, no litigation history, and better documentation than half the attorneys I know. She said during one meeting, let them try that. The court ordered discovery. That was when the house began speaking, not literally of course, but houses hold records if you know where to look. Claire arranged for us to inspect Bellweather Lane with a locksmith, a court-approved property manager, and a representative from the auction company. My mother was notified but did not attend. Richard Voss sent an associate. The house was gray with white trim, set back from the sidewalk behind 2 enormous sycamore trees. The porch sagged at one corner, and vines climbed the left side like fingers. When the locksmith opened the front door, the smell came first. Dust, old wood, cold plaster, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a drawer. I stepped inside and felt a strange ache. Not recognition exactly, more like walking into a sentence someone had begun writing for me before I was born. There were sheets over furniture, boxes stacked in the dining room, and sunlight falling through stained glass panels beside the staircase. The house was worn, but not ruined. Beneath the dust, I could see care, real care, my grandfather's kind of care. In the study, built-in shelves lined the walls. A roll-top desk sat beneath the window. Above the fireplace hung a framed photograph of the house from the 1940s. The auctioneer, Mr. Lowell, checked his inventory list. There is supposed to be a wall safe. The Voss associate frowned. We were told it was empty. Mr. Lowell said, we still inventory secured compartments. He ran his hand along the bookcase, then pressed a small brass latch hidden beneath a shelf. A narrow panel opened. Behind it was an old black safe. My heart began to pound. The locksmith worked for nearly 40 minutes. No one spoke much. Outside, a truck passed. Somewhere upstairs, old pipes ticked in the cold. When the safe opened, it made a low metallic sound that seemed to move through the floorboards. Inside were 3 envelopes, a ledger, a velvet pouch, and a small stack of photographs tied with twine. The largest envelope had my name on it, Nora Ellen Whitaker. My legs weakened. Mr. Lowell looked at the court representative. Do I release this to counsel? Claire nodded. She opened it carefully with gloved hands. Inside was the deed, the bank ledger, and my grandfather's letter. If you are reading this, Nora, then someone kept the truth from you. The Voss associate immediately said. We need to pause. Claire looked at him. No, we need to continue. The second envelope contained copies of trust documents. The third contained correspondence between my grandfather and Margaret Levin. The ledger showed deposits from rental income, property sales, and an investment account I had never heard of. The velvet pouch held my grandmother's wedding ring. But it was the photographs that changed everything. They showed my mother standing on the porch of Bellweather Lane with Richard Voss. Not recently, years ago. In one photo, my grandfather stood between them. His face was stern. My mother looked angry. Richard Voss looked exactly as he did in newspaper photos, calm, polished, patient. On the back of the photograph, my grandfather had written one line: Elaine and Voss want me to sell. I do not trust either of them. Claire took a slow breath. The Voss associate went pale, and I understood that my grandfather had not merely left me a house, he had left me a record. The deposition took place 6 weeks later in a conference room with beige walls, a long table, and a pitcher of water nobody touched. By then, the case had grown. The forged waiver had been referred to the county prosecutor. The trust account records suggested misappropriation. The notary on the waiver claimed she had no memory of me but remembered a woman from Mr. Voss's office bringing documents in bulk. Daniel Reyes had traced maintenance payments to shell vendors connected through relatives of Richard Voss. And Claire had found one final piece, a letter from my grandfather to Margaret Levin, written shortly before his death, stating that he feared Elaine was being pressured to help Richard Voss gain control of Bellweather Lane for redevelopment. He wrote, "My daughter believes Nora is too soft to protect herself. She is wrong. Nora watches. Nora remembers. Nora waits," I cried when Claire read that to me, not because of the money, because someone had seen me clearly before the world taught me to hide. Richard Voss arrived for deposition in a charcoal suit with a blue tie. He greeted everyone pleasantly. He looked like a man attending a board meeting, not one facing allegations of fraud. My mother arrived separately. She wore pearls. That detail stays with me. Pearls in a room where truth was about to become very plain. The court reporter swore Richard in first. Claire asked questions the way a good teacher questions a student who has copied an essay, not accusing, not emotional, just precise enough that every answer creates the next trap. "Mr. Voss, when did you become trustee of the Bellweather Preservation Trust?" "I would have to review the documents." "You did review them in preparation for today, correct?" "Yes." "So when did you become trustee?" He adjusted his cuff. "In 2004. Who appointed you?" "Henry Whitaker." "Did Henry Whitaker ever remove you?" "Not to my knowledge." "Did you provide annual accounting statements to Nora Whitaker?" "I believe notices were handled through counsel." "Which counsel?" "I don't recall." Claire slid a document across the table. "Is this your signature authorizing a payment from the trust account to Bellweather Strategic Services?" "It appears to be." "Who owns Bellweather Strategic Services?" "I'm not certain. Daniel had prepared us for this." Claire slid another document. "Is this the Ohio Secretary of State record listing your brother-in-law as statutory agent?" Richard's expression did not change, but his hand stopped moving. "I would need context." "You'll have it." That was all she said. For 3 hours, Claire walked him through records, payments, transfers, letters, the forged waiver, the auction authorization, the redevelopment proposal for several parcels surrounding Bellweather Lane. He did not collapse. Men like Richard Voss rarely collapse. They retreat into vocabulary. "I don't recall. That was delegated," my understanding was, to the best of my knowledge. Each phrase was a locked classroom door. Claire kept opening them. Then she showed him the photograph from the safe. His face changed for the first time. Not fear exactly. Recognition. "Do you remember this day?" Claire asked. "No, Mr. Voss, you are standing on the porch of 418 Bellweather Lane with Henry Whitaker and Elaine Whitaker. Do you remember this meeting?" He looked at my mother. It was quick, almost invisible, but the court reporter did not need to record it for everyone in that room to feel it. Claire said, "Please answer verbally." "I may have visited the property. Did Henry Whitaker tell you he did not intend to sell Bellweather Lane?" "I don't recall." "Did he tell you he was leaving it for Nora Whitaker?" "I don't recall." Claire opened my grandfather's letter. "Would reading his words refresh your recollection?" Richard's attorney objected. Claire smiled slightly. "We'll mark it as an exhibit." My mother's deposition was worse, not louder, worse because she tried to make betrayal sound like parenting. She said Grandpa Henry was confused. She said I was impractical. She said the house would have overwhelmed me. She said Richard Voss had only helped manage a difficult asset. She said she did not know the waiver was forged. Then Claire asked, "Miss S. Whitaker, who brought the waiver to the notary?" My mother looked down. "I don't remember." Claire placed a copy of the notary log in front of her. "Is this your signature as witness?" My mother stared at it. The room became so quiet I could hear the building's air system humming. She said, "It appears to be. Did Nora sign that document in your presence?" My mother's lips pressed together. I believed she had agreed. That was not my question. A long pause. No. One word. Small enough to fit on a page. Large enough to divide a life. No. The civil case settled before trial, but not before the judge issued findings that made the path clear. The waiver was invalid. The auction authorization was improper. Richard Voss was removed as trustee. An independent fiduciary was appointed temporarily. The court ordered restitution to the trust, attorney fees, and a full accounting. The prosecutor later brought charges related to forgery and financial misconduct. Richard Voss accepted a plea agreement that included restitution, probation, loss of his professional license, and a public record that no charitable board could polish away. My mother was not sent to prison. Some people think justice must always look like a locked door. Mine looked different. She admitted under oath that she had witnessed a document I never signed. She lost her position with the investment office. She was removed from every role connected to my grandfather's estate records. And she had to sit in a courtroom while a judge said, plainly and without ornament, that her actions deprived her daughter of property, notice, and truth. I watched her hear it. She did not look at me. Maybe that was mercy, maybe cowardice, maybe both. The Bellweather house was released to me 9 months after the safe was opened. The money was not as enormous as the first ledger made it seem because so much had to be recovered, repaired, taxed, and legally protected. But it was enough. Enough to restore the roof, enough to repair the porch, enough to pay legal fees without losing sleep, enough to create scholarships in my grandfather's name for students who wanted trade school, community college, apprenticeships, or teaching. Enough to give me something I had never had before, a door no one else could threaten to close. The first night I slept in Bellweather Lane, I did not sleep much. The house made old house sounds, pipes settling, wood shifting, wind pressing against the windows. I lay on a mattress in the front bedroom with paint samples on the dresser and boxes stacked along the wall. At 2 in the morning, I got up and walked downstairs. The moonlight crossed the hallway in pale rectangles. In the kitchen, I made tea in a chipped blue mug I had found wrapped in newspaper in the pantry. I stood barefoot on the cold floor and listened. For years I thought peace would feel like excitement. It did not. Peace felt like not bracing. Peace felt like drinking tea without rehearsing a defense. Peace felt like knowing the bills were in my name. The deed was recorded, the locks had been changed, and the truth had survived being buried. I kept teaching. People were surprised by that. Some assumed I would quit, travel, reinvent myself in some dramatic way. But I loved my classroom. I loved standing before teenagers and explaining that history is not just wars and presidents. It is paperwork, land records, testimony, signatures, laws written well and laws abused badly. It is people with power assuming no one will check the footnotes. My students noticed I had changed, not in a loud way. I laughed more easily. I stopped apologizing before asking for what I needed. I bought better shoes. I planted lavender along the front walk at Bellweather Lane because my grandmother had loved lavender, and tomatoes in the backyard because my grandfather believed every home should grow something you could eat. One afternoon, a student stayed after class. She was quiet, clever, always watching. She said, "Miss Whitaker, how do you know when someone is lying to you?" I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "You don't always know right away. So you keep records of what is true." She nodded, like she understood more than she wanted to say. I gave her the same advice Claire had given me. Do not confront too early. Do not let emotion destroy evidence. Ask for things in writing. Trust patterns more than promises, and never believe that being calm means you are weak. My relationship with my mother became a locked room I no longer needed to enter. She wrote me one letter after everything ended. It was 6 pages long, elegant, wounded, and almost an apology. Almost. She said she thought she was protecting me. She said my grandfather had favored me unfairly. She said Richard had convinced her the house would become a burden. She said she never expected things to go so far. I read it twice. Then I placed it in a folder labeled Elaine and put it in the filing cabinet. Some letters are not bridges. They are exhibits. I did not hate her. That surprised me. But I no longer arranged my life around earning softness from someone who used love like a locked account. There are griefs that do not disappear. They simply stop driving. The house took 2 years to restore properly. I did not make it grand. I made it honest. I kept the old staircase, even though a contractor suggested replacing it. I refinished the floors instead of covering them. I turned the study into a reading room with my grandfather's photograph above the mantel. The safe remains behind the bookcase, empty now except for copies of the court order, his letter, and a note I wrote to myself. The note says, "I was not brave. I was careful. That was enough. Every spring the lavender comes back. Every fall, the sycamore leaves cover the porch faster than I can sweep them. On Sunday mornings, I sit outside with coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. Dogs pulling leashes, children on bicycles, an old man across the street watering flowers in slippers. Ordinary life, which is the most underrated luxury in the world." Sometimes people ask whether finding the money changed me. The truth is, the money helped. I will not pretend otherwise. Money can buy locks, lawyers, inspections, medical appointments, and the ability to sleep through the night. Anyone who says money does not matter has probably never had to choose between safety and rent. But money was not the miracle. The miracle was documentation. The miracle was patience. The miracle was one old man who knew his granddaughter's nature well enough to leave the truth where only careful people would find it. My mother said I would never own a home. She was wrong. But more than that, she misunderstood what a home is. A home is not just walls, a deed, or a porch light. A home is a life where no one can rewrite your memory and call it love. It is a place where your name is not an accident on a document. It is where your silence is peaceful, not frightened. It is where the past may visit, but it does not get to move in. If there is one lesson I learned, it is this. When someone powerful tells you not to ask questions, write down the question. When someone close to you says paperwork does not matter, find the paperwork. When someone calls you greedy for wanting the truth, remember that truth and greed are not the same thing. I did not just inherit a house, I inherited evidence. I inherited my grandfather's faith in me. And slowly, one document, one hearing, one repaired floorboard at a time, I inherited myself. So now I want to ask you something. What would you have done if your own family told you there was nothing left, and years later you found your name hidden inside a safe? Would you confront them immediately, or would you do what I did and quietly gather the proof first? Tell me in the comments. I read more of them than you think. And if this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to remember that being underestimated is not the same as being powerless.